The federal government today introduced changes to its medical assistance in dying legislation. I'm joined now by the Minister of Justice, David Lametti, from the House of Commons. Hi, Minister. Nice to see you. Thanks for your time.
Good evening.
I have a couple other questions to ask you about other topics, but let's start with medically assisted dying. Can you explain to me, I know that you took out basically the crux of what was in the Quebec court decision, and that is taking out the reasonably foreseeable factor in all of this, but how specifically did you address that issue?
Well, what we have now are two tracks. So one track will still have the end-of-life regime with the criterion of reasonable foreseeability of death, with a certain set of criteria for application. And we've actually taken out a couple of things in that regime that were impediments. That still covers the majority of people, the vast majority of people, and it's a regime with which doctors and nurses and people are familiar. We've also added, in response to the Superior Court ruling, the possibility for people not in an end-of-life scenario. So people who might have a condition that's causing them a great deal of suffering, such as ALS, for example, but in which death isn't reasonably foreseeable. We've added a different set of standards there in order to promote proper assessment and making sure that people are aware of all the possibilities moving forward for care, palliative care, other kinds of supports they might be entitled to. But it's now open to those people as well.
Can I ask you to explain in layman's terms? So for example, if someone is diagnosed with a terminal disease, but death is a while away, right? It's not something that is imminent. How exactly what will they be able to avail themselves of, and how?
They might be able to qualify for MAID on that assessment that you've just given me, but there would be a longer period of assessment, so the minimum period would be 90 days. The physician, there would be the two physicians or nurses in that case, the two medical practitioners, one of whom would have to have an expertise of some sort in that condition that's causing the suffering. Doesn't necessarily mean a specialist, but someone who's had experience. And then the doctors would also have an obligation to make certain information available about the kinds of supports the person might be able to attain if they decide to keep going. And also those supports have to be adequately discussed and assessed with the patient. If they meet all those criteria, then they might be able to assess medical assistance in dying.
I was looking at your initial position before you became Justice Minister on the original legislation, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but you voted against it because you were worried about how it would stand up, the constitutionality of it. Do you believe that this version that you're introducing is more sound legally? Are you worried about the constitutionality of it?
I'm definitely of the view that this is more sound constitutionally. I think it will pass muster under the Charter. One of the concerns last time around was precisely that people in a non-end-of-life scenario wouldn't have access to MAID, and we've addressed that. So that's I think a progressive thing moving forward. Whatever the case, we've always envisaged that this would be incremental change, that we would move and evolve with Canadian society in a progressive way. And medical assistance in dying is now really part of the fixture in our medical establishment, in places like institutions dealing with patients with terminal cancer, for example. And it gives people more control over the way in which they live, but also the way in which they die. And people have found that to be positive. People have found that to be uplifting in many cases. And so we're ready for this next incremental step. And of course, we have a larger parliamentary review that will begin this summer on the really difficult questions of advanced requests of mental illness as the sole underlying criterion and the case of minors.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.